All right, so sorry you guys missed your break, but you get to listen to me instead, and hopefully that's going to be at least as entertaining. So I'm going to spend the next 15 minutes telling you about something that I think everyone believes, which is that spring is coming, but I'm going to hopefully be able to tell it to you in a way that will give you maybe a little insights into what you should be looking for and how you can prepare for it and what it can do for you. So spring is coming. We're in a crypto winter. I think everyone knows that. I remember, well, first of all, I've seen 4 crypto winters. I remember when the crypto winter was only called Bitcoin winter because there was no other crypto that could go down. So I've seen a lot of these. I think it's just a natural part of the cycle. It doesn't feel good, but it doesn't mean that there isn't something that to look forward to and to plan for as it unfolds. So what's very helpful when you think about the crypto winter is, what are the underlying reasons that we all have believed in crypto? Why has crypto been something that so many people are involved in? And understanding those truths, which is basically going back to the future, which is let's try and understand what it was like 6 or 7 years ago, can help us think about what is it going to be like when this crypto winter inevitably, in my opinion, ends. So the core reasons for crypto, which in my opinion is a way to change how assets move, how information moves, is absolutely still intact. And when you go back to kind of the core important feature is that you have a distributed system. And distributed systems and open systems are so much better than centralized and closed systems. And this is really obvious in the banking system, where you basically have a centralized system that's relying on centralized gatekeepers. And what is the problem with that? The problem is, like we saw in 2008 with the financial crisis, you can't have any institution fail or you just get a domino effect. And this isn't just true in the financial system, it's really true on a very broad basis across how you keep records, how payments work, the healthcare system, identity, you go on and on. You're relying on centralized record keepers, completely inefficient. And I think if you fast forward to the future, and you just look and say the financial system, there's $600 trillion of assets in the world, which is a really big number, and they're going to end up on a blockchain. I think they'll inevitably be on a blockchain. I think almost everyone you talk to now says it's going to end up on a blockchain. So if that's the world you're going to end up in, the question is, how will you get there? How will it unfold? But it's clearly a better way to have assets stored, to have information stored than the way it is now. So that means what you have is a lot of price action. And price action is real. It doesn't feel good. Price goes down. People lose money. But there's a couple components here. Firstly, the chart, if you go back far, is still up and to the right, which is generally good. But when you go down from the peak, it doesn't feel great. Down 85% is not fantastic. And certainly there are a whole variety of other assets that are down a lot more than just the price of Bitcoin. This is kind of like the ubiquitous index, if you will, of what's going on in the industry. The pain of going down is very real, but at the same time, that isn't a true depiction of what's going on. The actual transformation that's happening is not really dependent upon price action. This is kind of depicting, in many ways, animal spirits. You're going to get boom-bust cycles. And you can't even see some of the boom-bust cycles that happened if you go real far out to the left. And I can tell you, those were actually much darker than this boom-bust cycle. When you went from like $30 down to, whatever it was, like a buck or something, there's a real chance you're like, oh, maybe Bitcoin just is not worth anything. And the whole thing is not worth anything. No one is saying that anymore. What this really is just a very healthy cleansing of the system. And you need to have cleansing of the systems because sometimes you get overinvestment, things get a little crazy, you throw a lot of stuff against the wall, you see what sticks, and then you have a retrenchment. And so what I describe that's going on now is this is the Pets.com moment. And I was talking to my team about Pets.com, and nobody knew who Pets.com was. So I thought a couple things. One, I must be very old. Or two, that's the whole point that no one knows Pets.com. Because this was a huge stock. It was at NASDAQ 5,000, and it was March of 2000. This hit a high, and it promptly went to zero. And guess what? The internet continued to grow. Companies created enormous amounts of success. Facebook, Google, Apple, blah, blah, blah. We all know the story of the internet since 2000. But this felt really bad. Pets.com and everything else, it just felt like it was just a giant noise. That process was actually healthy. Changing the whole system is going to take time. You're not going to always understand where things are going to go, and having the boom bust is actually what you want to have happen. And so that happened to the internet. I think that's a very good analogy, is what happened to the internet and where are we at. Now, I don't know if this moment here was 2000 for NASDAQ or if it's like 1994. We don't really know for sure, but it's still very early, I think, is the key point. And so Pets.com, Webvan, all these companies, they're gone. The internet has transformed everything that we do. I think that's the exact right analogy for what blockchain is going to do. There's a lot of shitcoins out there that have gone to zero, and they're never coming back. And that has absolutely nothing to do with whether or not this technology is capable of transforming everything that happens in our lives. 4 reasons why I'm not worried. Here we go. Fundamental point here is the fundamental logic is still intact. It's in fact improving, in my opinion, and this can be lost. And so while there's a lot that's happening underneath the surface, when you look at the price action, which we were just talking about, you wouldn't know. And frankly, you can just look at conferences like this, year over year, huge change in how many people are here. But does that mean that the underlying fundamentals are not improving? I think they actually are. And so when I look at a couple things like code commits, you look at code commits in the major protocols, they're still going up. The number of core devs that are operating in, like, say, Bitcoin and Ethereum, it's actually broader than it's ever been. To me, that's an underlying gauge of, do you really have a sound foundation? And so you might be losing the marginal person who's speculating in some of these coins. That's not the same thing as is the protocols themselves, is the technology itself continuing to improve and continuing to be able to solve new problems. So that to me is exciting. The next thing is institutional engagement. So at Paxos, we see customers that are retail, that are small institutions, all the way to very large institutions. I can tell you that the engagement is significantly changing. And you don't have to believe me. We saw Fidelity getting involved, and they just launched. We've seen examples of the New York Stock Exchange ICE getting involved. They're creating Backed. And there are a whole variety of other large firms that are getting involved. And now that's in the financial trading, so to speak, which is, I think, bullish for the price. But forgetting that, there's a huge number of companies that have been working to use blockchain technology to transform what they're doing. There was JP Morgan Coin, there's talk about Facebook, you go on and on, all using blockchain technology to help change their businesses, improve what they're doing. So to me, that's a very good sign. Now, large institutions move slow. This is just the reality of them being large institutions. But while they might be moving slow, what's going on underneath is demonstrable. And you can follow it and you can understand what's happening. And we certainly see it. I think that's a very good sign that the technology is still growing in its penetration and what it can change. So, and then maybe I'll make this fourth point, and I'll make it again, which is that the understanding of distributed systems as a superior way of storing information that you need to use in a networked way is, I think, really clear. And maybe a couple years ago, it still was a lot of debate. The topic of blockchain has really been like kind of the topic du jour for a lot of firms for a while. And there were debates internally, why would you want to use this when you could use a centralized database? How is this better? I think at this point, it's really clear that this is where most of the world's assets will end up being stored, on some form of a distributed system, on some form of a blockchain. And not just what I would say are the world's assets, but something far beyond that. Because really all of your identity, anything that you need to share with somebody else, which frankly is going to be most information, it's going to be on a blockchain distributed system. And an example would be, there was a huge debate back in the internet about whether or not information would be on intranets or internets. And in fact, Bill Gates wrote a whole book about how it's going to be all about intranets, not internets, actually. So believe it or not, I remember this. There was a big book. He came out and said, internet, that's great, but like, who's going to put information and trust that? And the answer is basically everybody, right? So I think the power of a public system is so, in some ways, understood in a poor way. Because when it's centralized, it's easy to control. But when it's open, you're creating network effects. And when you're starting with network effects that are small, it takes a while to build up criticality. And while it's building criticality, you can lose this sense that something powerful is really being unleashed and being built. And so in my opinion, that's what I think has now tipped very clearly, that there's this understanding that the benefits of a distributed system can really change the entire way the system is set up. Having to rely on centralized intermediaries, which we know doesn't work. They create systemic risk. It creates financial crises. Or I'd say at the very least, it significantly exacerbates financial crises. That can all be really significantly changed with this type of system. So think about, okay, now let's think about the future of what these systems could look like and what they're going to enable. And I think this is really important because if you believe, like I do, that it's definitely going to change, then the real question is, what do you do with that insight? How do you think about businesses? How do you think about opportunities? Where do you put your effort? And so I'll tell you a little about what we're doing at Paxos, because that's easy to give you as some examples. So we've been involved in the blockchain space now for over 6 years. And I can remember when Bitcoin was at 3 or 4 cents, that's when I started to get involved. I remember wiring money down to Mt. Gox when it was in Costa Rica. So that was even before Japan. So I can tell you, I can remember a long time ago when things were really speculative, but we made investments in terms of thinking about how you would set up a structure to be able to leverage this technology to be able to create some fundamental changes. And so that's what Paxos is about trying to do. We created a trust company in May of 2015. We were the first firm to be approved by a regulator in the crypto space, creating a chartered financial institution. That's what a trust company is. It's organized under banking law. This is really special. We've had it for a while. It allows us to operate like a financial institution. At the same time, we're trying to operate very much as a technology company, but trying to marry those together, that's a very unique process. And what it does is allow us to create infrastructure in a completely different way for the financial system. So as a custodian, we can hold assets. We hold real world assets. It could be crypto, which is clearly a digital native asset, but we can hold cash. We have a Pax coin, which is a stable coin. We hold our customers' cash and you can put it into a blockchain. We hold securities. We can hold commodities. So we hold real world assets, but we act as a gateway into a blockchain world. So if anyone can come to us, we can hold their assets and we can put it into any type of blockchain that they want. And so this acts as a gateway both on and off of a blockchain world. So this is a really important intermediary layer that anyone can build on top of. And so it allows basically trust as a service to be leveraged by anyone. That way other people don't have to go out and create trust companies or financial institutions. And so when we've sat here and tried to think about what do you need in order to push this world forward, it's a way of being able to translate from the way things are now into the way things will be. Or in many cases, the way they are right now. And so the most clear example, which I was just mentioning, is Pax, which is our stable coin. And so you deposit $1 with us, And this is different from depositing a dollar with anybody else, because as a trust company, even if we fail, it's completely segregated. And even if banks fail, it doesn't matter. It's held in U.S. Treasury T-bills. So very, very safe to hold your cash with us. Safer than a bank. We're not taking anyone's money and making loans with it. So you give us your money. It's held, it's completely segregated. We put it into the Ethereum blockchain. We'll put it into other blockchains over time. So we're acting as this gateway from cash that's trapped in commercial banks, where you're tied to 9 to 5 operating hours, doesn't move very quickly, and it's very costly, into something that is very, very flexible. And we're going to do that not just for cash, we do it for a whole variety of other assets. That's just the one that's, I think, really easy for people to understand. So that's what we've been doing, is basically continuing to invest in our business, building infrastructure for the broader ecosystem. But what's also really important is realizing that in some ways, these types of pullbacks, that Bitcoin chart where the price is going down, is a real opportunity. And the opportunity is to realize where the world's going and to invest. And you got to do it in the right way. No one wants to run out of money. But continue to invest through these down cycles. Because actually, this is when you can find really great people. This is when you can start to push out new products, and the noise in the room isn't so loud that you might get drowned out. So in some ways, while the price doesn't feel good, it creates the opportunity for the entire next part of the cycle. And it can be one that I think will be far more transformative than anything we've seen so far. So my last piece of advice is, if anything else fails, you have any other thoughts about what you're supposed to do, just hodl it. I'm a Bitcoin holder for a long time. I still hold Bitcoin. I still believe in it. I don't think there's any doubt that Bitcoin as a crypto native asset is a great store of value, potentially the best store of value. That's still to be proved out, but I think it really has this unbelievable position that it's built. But even more importantly, what is the technology that underlies it? And what is it enabling? And what is it creating the opportunity for us to do as we keep building businesses and continue to transform both the financial services world, which is what we're doing, but actually something far more broad than that. So I think that this type of winter is actually just a completely normal part of the cycle. And that while there might be less people here, I think that the actual intention of the people that are still in the room is much higher. And that's actually what you need, which is concentration of energy. And so I think spring is coming. I think everyone here must believe that, because clearly when people come to a conference after the price is down 90%, they must think that spring is coming too. But I wanted to make sure that everyone could understand it from a whole different perspective, which is, what is the first principles reason why spring is coming? And so we don't know the time, but I can tell you it's absolutely going to happen. And what we have to do is make sure that we lay the foundation so that that next spring is as big as possible. So with that, I'll see if there are any questions. Do we have time for any questions? Cool. Anybody have any questions? Somebody. Going once? There we go.
Do you see fiat-backed tokens as a useful way of doing cross-chain transactions?
Yeah. So I think there's a couple things about a fiat token, and this is our stable coin that's backed one for one with US dollars. You could back it with other types of fiat currency. But what are you solving? The first thing is commercial bank money only moves 9 to 5 days a week. So obviously everyone understands blockchains are 24 hours, 7 days a week. Also, you can move the money instantaneously. Money doesn't move instantaneously right now. It usually takes hours to days, depending on whether or not it's a bank wire to it's an international movement. So it's moving slowly, and it's not programmable, which is probably really important to mention here. So commercial bank money isn't programmable. It's sitting in a bank account, and you can't really do too much with it. Whereas when you put it on a blockchain, you can start to program it with smart contracts. A lot more functionality, and so that ability to program cash moving is really important, because now you have a way of being able to communicate between chains in a way that isn't going to be fluctuating nearly as much as native tokens are. Now, there's pros and cons to using native tokens to communicate between chains versus using something that is fiat-backed, but it really does, I think, allow a certain type of flexibility, because different blockchains are solving different types of problems. They're meant to solve different types of problems deliberately. And every time you're dealing with another native token, you start to create coordination costs between the chains, because you got to figure out how to swap back and forth and make sure that you're getting the right amount of value every time you move between them. If you have something that's a stable store of value acting as a means of value transmission between the chains, you can really solve, I think, a lot of the problems that have made it difficult to be able to operate with, across chain, unless you're almost really running an exchange. And the problem with running an exchange is you're centralized again, which is what we're trying to avoid. Ultimately, is trying to be as decentralized as possible. So I think you're never going to get away from the need to trust a certain entity in a blockchain. You're going to always have to have at least some amount of trust. The question is, how can you make that as small as possible? Because the less trust that's required, the more freedom that you can create. And so having a common fiat coin that's used between different chains means you have to trust that fiat coin for sure, but that means you don't then have to understand how to get between all these different chains in a way that could be really confusing. Yeah. One more question and then, okay, great. And then we're getting the high sign.
Thank you. 100% reserve seems very inefficient. What do you think of fractional reserve-backed currency, which is like governments have operated or banks operate?
Yeah, I mean, there's a long-running debate between should you have fractional reserves versus should you be fully backed. I mean, it goes all the way back to being on the gold standard, frankly. And so the issue with being fully backed is that you probably get less velocity out of the money. When you're fractionally backed, you usually end up going down a slippery slope of devaluation or inefficient signaling because you're not fully backed by something. Someone can create additional currency of whatever kind that might be, and you don't necessarily know if the signal you're getting from the currency is just someone creating more of it, or there's actual real demand or not enough demand. And so this is the complexities that you constantly have. Our viewpoint has been, we're not going to try and solve that problem. It's a hard problem to solve. I have a viewpoint on what I think is a better solution, but that's a bit above my pay grade to actually propose that solution, because we're not going to be a central bank. What we're really trying to do is just say, hey, here's a fiat currency that we've upgraded. That's the way I think about it. We've upgraded it from being on a central ledger, most likely a COBOL mainframe in some bank's back office. Instead, we've taken that and we've now put it onto a blockchain. And so instead of being trapped in technology from 40 or 50 years ago with a nice like kind of GUI interface slapped on it that makes it look like it's kind of new, instead of doing that, we're going to put it onto new infrastructure, which is a blockchain that is completely modern and completely flexible and able to be programmed. So we're just going to upgrade the cash. And if a central bank decides they want to, make more cash, then that's, kind of their decision, and they can decide whether they want to do that. We're not going to do fractional-based stablecoin, because I think that defeats the purpose, which is, do you want to have $1 equal one coin? You know exactly what's going on with it, and if you want to redeem it, you can get it back. I don't think anyone's looking to Paxos to basically recreate the monetary system. We're certainly not looking at ourselves in that way. What we're trying to do is change the infrastructure of the financial system from being old and archaic and therefore not very responsive and not very flexible to something that is far more dynamic. And that's something that we know we can do. Whereas being a central bank, which other tokens have tried, also unsuccessfully so far, because there's securities rules and there's regulations and there's all kinds of other problems. That's just not something that we think that we have the right tools to be able to solution, really. So I think that's it. I got the high sign here, so I appreciate the questions. Thanks everyone for your time. Yeah.